Welcome, LinkedIn Live, YouTube, and Instagram viewers to the fourth MavSign Fraudcast. I am Rudy Nieto, the CEO of MavSign. We are a leader in fraud prevention and secure offsite closing for automotive dealers. Joined with me is my president and CTO, Val Balanescu, who has created our magnificent technology stack and has been affiliated with MavSign for going close to 15 years. And then my special guest is Tom Kline, the founder and CEO of Better Vantage Point Solutions, and also, which we'll talk about later, wrote a book called Tuck the Octopus. So we've got some tentacles to discuss later in the show. But, you know, we had kind of some things we were going to riff about today, Tom, that you and I have been talking about for a while.
Right.
I'll let you start, and I would love to have you just give a brief background of your experience, and then we'll talk a little bit about tricolor. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but that's kind of the hot topic right now. So we're gonna get into a $200 million loss by Fifth Third really quick. So just go tell us about yourself real quick, Tom.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Rudy and Val. Tom Kline. I'm a former dealer. Was a dealer for 30 years. We had all kinds of different franchise. We ended up with Chevrolet and Subaru. We had at our height, we had 450 employees and 7 locations. We sold our stores in 2019. That's when I opened my consulting business called Better Vantage Point. And what we do is I'm kind of a fractional compliance and risk guy for dealers. So I go in, analyze what the risks are, and then, you know, risks can be in HR, risks can be cyber issues, risks can be with your banks. There's all kinds of risks. And so my job is to make sure that the dealer's assets are safeguarded. So that's what I do.
Great. So I think what I heard you say is, you know, you've heard of like dealerships finally moving to more of a chief compliance officer, chief risk officer, like it's not just required by CFPB or Graham-Leach Blyer, but they're actually doing it because they understand the value of not losing money and getting ripped off. So what you're saying is you actually provide a fractional service for those where it may not be cost justified to have a full-time person based off of their size. Is that
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Great. So I'll start by saying best practice for anybody listening, you need to have somebody, whether it's fractional or full-time, you need to have somebody that works directly for the dealer that's not being influenced by people that, you know, get commissions on sales, that has the no card, right? So, so excellent. So Tom, I got to ask, just octopus, Tuck the Octopus, talk to me.
Yeah. So Tuck the Octopus. So I tried to think about what it felt like on a daily basis to run a dealership. And I've heard expressions like it's a high wire act, you know, you're always trying to balance, but that didn't quite do it for me. And so I thought about you know, to me, it felt like every day, like trying to tuck an octopus into bed, but the tentacles kept flopping all over the place. And so my job as, you know, as the dealership owner is to try to tuck those tentacles in to make sure that the octopus is happy and safe, and that when there is a problem, we can jump right on it. So because early resolution of problems means saved profits. I mean, it's super simple in business and especially in the dealership world where there are so many moving parts and specifically moving mouths. both employee mouths and customers, right? And that's where your risk comes from. 80% of the risk are I call them two-legged risks, right? Where problems either come from customers or they come from employees.
Right, and we'll talk about the employee angle. So I was kind of guessing in my mind where the octopus came from, because you and I had directly talked about it. So I was like, well, I know octopuses have suckers on them, so maybe it's about suckers. Or I also, know that a lot of them have the ability to camouflage and hide, which
And they're
maybe
very,
there's an angle there because we're
smart.
talking about deep fake, and they're very smart animals, and they can live a long time. So okay, good to know. So Tuck the octopus.
Yes, and it's also the name of my book, by the way. Shameless plug. So
yeah, there you go. I'm looking forward to getting into that. So okay. I want to go directly into this, and I think, I'm going to call him Val in a minute to discuss this, but, our company, MapSign, has been very focused on how to prevent fraud from the outside, right? And all the bad guys out there that are making up deepfakes, right? They're making up fake. They're not just making up fake IDs. They're stealing biometrics. They've got all. I mean, Val has all the stories because he's developed the tech stack and the process flow to prevent it. But right now is Tricolor, right? They're one of the top. I think they're number 7 used car only dealer in the United States, and they just declared for bankruptcy, right? And cited in the bankruptcy was a $200 loss write-off for Fifth Third. And
200 million.
200 million. I apologize. 200 million. Whew, it's just a big number.
It's a big number.
So when I first heard it, I was like, "What happened?" And it was an inside job, right?
Well, to interrupt for just a second, the liabilities were listed apparently there's a range from 1 billion to 10 billion. It wasn't any more specific than that. That's what I had read. So
wow. Okay. So it's going to get uglier before it gets prettier. Okay.
I think so.
Yeah. So talk to me about what you've heard about. I think there's a lot of developing news, but what have you heard? And it is kind of the root cause of some of the challenges that they had.
Well, I mean, their business model was that they would finance people who didn't have social security numbers, people who didn't have green cards, so undocumented workers. They became a little bit of a target for the current administration, and so they were taking the riskiest, I would say, of the loans, and so they had a high risk tolerance. So here we are. It didn't work.
Yeah, and so what's coming out of this case is that there was there's a discussion of, was it negligence or was it cooperation in how much they could kind of power book these deals, because ultimately they were bringing the banks in to help take these deals on, right?
Sure,
and so that's where I brought up the Fifth Third and the 200 million. There's probably other banks lining up, right?
Well, they securitize the loans. So the way that works is that Tricolor would bundle and package certain tranches, and I don't know the specifics, but let's just say $100 million worth of loans, and then they would either sell them or fund them. It's unclear to me how they did it with some of these larger banks, Fifth Third, JP Morgan, and there's a few others as well. And so, and that's how they continue to fund operations. So it's hard to know what will happen. If I were a dealer and I had been funding through them, I would pull my dealer agreement this morning, send it over to my lawyer, find out what potential liabilities I have. Could, in receivership, if JP Morgan or another bank takes over that loan, is there any way for them to come back to the dealership and say, hey, you need to buy this on recourse? Like on what basis could there be recourse? There's always recourse for fraud. That's always in a dealer agreement. Power booking, usually there's recourse for power booking. So if you were a dealer and you were working with this finance company, I'd pull your dealer agreement today and take a look.
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of ladders on. I think this was kind of last year, but it's still lingering. Is there's been a lot of scrutiny on credit repair type outfits that are helping people repair their credit. It seems linked, like, okay, let's go take people that are more likely to agree to whatever you tell them to agree to, and we'll write down whatever you need to write down in order to get a car, because they probably need it legitimately for work, right?
Sure.
So I feel like they're preying upon them, and but I don't think they know that maybe that bank might be, or that company might be creating some falsities about what their capability to pay the loan is. And I think that's where we're ending up, and that's what we're uncovering. And so it certainly seems like it's more of an inside job. It's not like outside fraudsters are just stealing cars from them. So I guess I'm gonna ask Val real quick. You've been doing this with MapSign for a long time. You've seen the technology side, right? And you've seen the people side, right? And so talk to me about I learn this from Val every day. He teaches me something new. Talk to me about how we balance the anecdotal things we see with the people versus how the technology's stopping things, and how does that work together to, prevent bad actors, in what we do today.
Right. So Tom, first of all, it's a pleasure to be on this podcast with you.
Thank you.
It's an honor. Great story. I would love to hear in a second what motivated you to write the book. I think there's something behind that really will spark interest and a desire for others to pick up the book and learn, because I'm sure there's a lot in that. Back to your question, Rudy, I would say, obviously, we look at our niche is the remote transactions, right? So what we see is, and what we focus on primarily is the experience that the dealership needs to, or the challenges that the dealership has in the process with the remote customers. So in that, and obviously for us, since we're in a Fraudcast podcast, right? So we mainly focus on the fraud aspect of the transaction. But where we started at the core was, how do we make sure that the dealership and the customers have a really good experience, knowing that majority of the players, the actors, are not bad actors, right? So it's a very fine line of defining that path where the customer may be a bad actor, but at the same time we need to focus on delivering a secure, fast, and compliant signing. And that's at the core of what we're doing. Now, when it comes to the bad actors on the dealership end, there's many that we've seen many instances where I'll give you an example. A lot of them are trying to skip the ID verification step. And so we have processes in place where we challenge that. We ask, why do you want to skip the ID verification on the customer? And we get, we have a flow of answers that make sense. And we know that, ultimately they will meet with a notary. So that's a final verification step. So they're not getting away with it. But so there's so many layers that we have built in our system that are not visible unless the red flags are being triggered. And that's when our team comes in, and it's this fine line between the amazing scheduling team that we have that works with the dealership, and then you've got the success team that comes in and facilitates on the dealership end to make sure that they understand the process. They submit the orders, because ultimately we want to avoid fraud, but also primarily we want to close a signing as fast and securely and compliant as possible. So I hope that answers is just one example, but there's so many layers of triggers that we have in place that are kind of hidden, but they are triggered in very different steps of the process that normally the customer or the dealership are not aware of, just because we want to make sure that we stay compliant and we execute properly on every side.
So Tom, what I do know about what you preach is that, so we have obviously technology. Everybody's got technology. Tricolor had technology, right? But you heard, like, we have several different layers of people that are looking for the, looking for those anecdotes, looking for those things that maybe the tech missed or somebody knew the tech was going to miss. And so I think that plays well into the question Val had for you about, why Tuck the Octopus and why did you feel compelled to go that direction? And, I think people are still a big part of that.
Right. Well, I mean, before I answer that particular question, Rudy, I think it's important to point out, if I remember, that the statistics are for MavSign and companies like MavSign, that 4 to 5% of the people cancel their appointment, so that that the transaction never happens. So that tells you right there, if I'm remembering my reading from a while ago, is that not correct? 4 to 5%?
Higher. It's growing higher, Tom.
It's growing higher. Okay, so I'm low. So what is it now, Val? I think it's important for the audience members to hear that.
So I would say the past 2 years, it's grown a little over 10%.
It's incredible, right? 1 out of 10 are involving either they don't show up, of which let's take a percent or two out of that and just say, because most people who want to buy a car want to buy a car. It's not like buying a bed where you don't have to get it that day, or maybe you find something cheaper or whatever. I mean, most people who want to buy a car want to buy it, and they've gone into the dealership and they wanted to pick whatever. So even if it's 8%, that's still a huge number of people that you're weeding out. And then and I will get to your question here in a second. But if you think about, let's say you do have those fraud and you do make those claims on your insurance. First of all, you got to check your insurance to make sure that you have coverage for identity theft. I got a phone call a number of years ago from a dealer in Texas who had sent 3 vehicles, I think, to Wisconsin, Illinois, and Michigan, one to each of the states, totaling $160,000 on the promise of getting contracts back. Of course, the whole thing was fraudulent. I told him to send me his insurance policy. His insurance policy didn't have anything for fraud or for theft or for what's called trick and device coverage. Zero. So he took a $160,000 loss. So I mean, it happens all the time. So I'd encourage anybody listening, check your insurance policy, see what's covered and what's not, that in the case that you do have a fraud, that you're able to cover it. Now, if you have fraud over and over and over, you're going to get non-renewed by your insurance carrier. That's important to know too. And then you're going to have to go to a much more expensive solution. So, and we could talk an hour about that issue alone. But getting back to your question, it took me 5 years to write the book. And I wrote it because there really isn't anything else on the market. And it's something that I feel like dealers need to be aware of, all this information. And, let's face facts that risk and compliance is not the sexy part of the business, right? It's not the most exciting, but it is exciting when you can keep the money you make instead of losing it and have a leaky bucket, to use that analogy. And so working on fraud, working on risk, working on compliance helps ensure that you keep the money that you make. And so that was kind of the motivation, is I really think it's an important, I really think it's important information to have.
Yeah, we 100% agree. Yeah, go ahead.
Quick follow up to that, Tom. I mean, 30 years experience. That's amazing. What do you think it's kind of the single biggest risk that the dealerships consistently underestimate?
I mentioned it earlier, actually, and that is what's happening with your customers and what's happening with your employees. And if you're not getting the flow of information into your office, your two-legged problems are going to cause you the biggest problems, right? Employees going to the EEOC, employees going to lawyers when they're not happy, employees going to regulators, the labor board, There's all kinds of ways for employees to create problems for you. And then consumers going to the FTC, going to lawyers, class actions. I know of a class action, and I've said this before, I know of a class action that started in church. Two ladies were sitting next to each other and say, hey, this dealer screwed me over. And the other lady said, they screwed me over too. And, $10 million later, there was a problem. And this was $10 million. It was, as I recall, it was a $7 million settlement plus all the lawyers' fees. And this was 25 years ago.
Tom, that kind of prompts a question. What do you think it's kind of the kind of poor compliance practices kind of nearly sank a dealership that you kind of a story that you could think of that a dealership went through and kind of the lessons learned from that? If you
Sure, without using names, last year there was a dealership group that got fined $20 million. The 2 years before that, there was another dealer group that was fined $10 million. I know that of another dealer group that is, I know more than one actually, that's ongoing negotiations with the FTC. And the way the FTC negotiates is, you come up and they go up too. That's not how it's supposed to work, right? You go up, they come down, you go up, regulators don't necessarily work in a linear fashion. And I know a lot of dealers feel like in a Republican administration, they can let their guard down and not work on compliance as much. But the attorneys general in every state are very, very active. These folks are politically motivated, and they are out aggressively making sure that dealers are doing right by consumers. I mean, it's the unintended consequences, Val, that really sink dealers. And that's why you need to know, what your insurance policies cover and what they don't.
So if you were to kind of identify the top 3 or top 5 mistakes that regulators immediately spot or notice when they walk into a dealership, that would be interesting to kind of highlight those to everyone.
Regulatory problems, almost every single time they happen, start with upset customers. And it's not just one upset customer, it's more than one. And so dealerships all too often have the mentality that, we didn't do anything wrong, so we're not going to pay for the set of tires. So the customer buys a used car. Of course, it goes through inspection. The dealership's technicians check the tire tread. Customer takes it to their mechanic. The mechanic says, oh, these tires are bald, right? So the customer comes back and the dealership wants to argue with the customer about new tires. Okay. It's not going to work. And whether you were right or not, make the customer happy. Now, I'm not telling you have to give the store away. There are ways to do it so you don't do that, but you have to find a way to satisfy the customers. And when the customers are not satisfied, they are going to look for ways to become satisfied. And one of them is to go to the CFPB, right, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Federal Trade Commission, the attorneys general, and they're gonna keep going until they get some resolution, because this is the second biggest purchase they make next to a home. So the biggest mistake is not satisfying customers and having a culture where you're listening to, we didn't do anything wrong, and so we're not going to spend any money to satisfy the customer. By far and away, that is the biggest concern. Whenever you read a press release from any of these folks, you'll notice on the press release it says, we surveyed hundreds or thousands of customers, and 88% said that this thus and such happened. And so they don't start looking if they're not prompted to look.
Right.
Yeah, makes sense.
Can I have one more quick question? I think that this is
until we run out of time.
But I mean, clearly the dealerships see the compliance aspect, whether they don't understand it or a lot of times they see this as a burden. How do you think they can turn that, or how do you bring that peace of mind to them and turn this into a competitive advantage to them? Because clearly having the right compliance set of rules in place gives them a competitive advantage if they know how to go about it.
Sure. I mean, customers, all the surveys show that customers want transparency in their car buying experience. And when dealers, as an example, and there's still a lot of cases out there where dealers are inserting products that customers don't know about, right? And they get home or they look at their paperwork the next day, they say, I didn't agree to this. And so having compliant processes and making sure that you are going back, and the most important aspect of it is that you may have policies, but if nobody's auditing what's going on a monthly basis and you don't know what's going on, then I can promise you they're not following your policies. And so by making sure that you are documenting and retraining, if a regulator ever comes into the business, you can say, hey, you're right, Mrs. McGillicuddy, we'll take care of her because we didn't know that she had a problem. But you can't say systemically that we don't care about our customers. Sit down and let me show you what we do every month. Sit down and let me show you about how we retrain. And what you're doing is you're protecting the assets of the company, right? All the car dealers know in their mind when they wake up in the morning how much their blue sky is worth, right? How much the ongoing operation is worth. And so compliance protects that blue sky, because if you get into a position you're trying to write a check for 10 million or 15 million or 20 million dollars, you're eroding that blue sky. And to use this very specific example, if you have a problem with the FTC, they often make you enter into what's called a consent order. And a consent order is an outline of how you have to operate going forward. Sometimes those consent orders are for 20 years. And if you sell the business, the new owner has to comply with the consent with the consent order. So if you have to do all these things to satisfy the FTC, that's going to severely affect the blue sky number. And you selling the business doesn't mean that you're going to get out of that. So it can really erode the value of your operation.
Wow, that's huge. And then we started talking about we haven't even mentioned the lending angle, right? And so you talked about dealers reading their agreements about ID theft and how the insurance rates, but I think also dealers need to be making sure they've read. I think probably the dealer or a compliance officer might have read the lending agreement on what it says, right? But how much does that trickle down to the people placing the loans with the consumers? Have they read them? Do they understand what the rules are, right?
Right. I mean,
or an identity theft or offsite or what have you, because the lenders need to protect themselves.
And to follow on to that, Rudy, a lot of those dealer agreements say that if you've had a regulatory problem, that they can make you repurchase all the agreements, because they don't, I've seen it various ways, but regulatory problems can create another unintended consequence of repurchasing loans, whether it's 1 or 100 or 1,000. It'll depend on what the language in that dealer agreement says. So regulatory problems beget other problems.
Yeah. Well, and it speaks to why you see a lot of the larger groups going to kind of like preferred lender like lists, so that each dealership has a pretty uniform list of which banks they can use or not use, so that way they can control it. And they kind of it's there's less variables. So that's also really interesting.
It's all about the risk. Right? It's all about the risk. Right. Sorry, Val.
Yeah. No. I just want to kind of pinpoint that out as well, because Rudy, on what Rudy said, lenders are more and more, especially in our context of retail remote transactions, a lot of them are pushing back to make sure that if it's a remote transaction, they're pushing back to make sure that they're using MavSign to complete the signing and seal the documents before they even proceed with their processes. So that's an important aspect. I do have a quick question, Rudy. I don't know how much time we have, but I mean, this is interesting.
We'll do last question, and then we'll open it up for the audience if they have any more.
Okay, so I mean, it's for the panel, for the both of you, because I know you kind of live in the future as well when it comes to thinking about strategy. How do you see kind of the compliance challenges evolve with remote e-contracting, and especially specifically to our space for Rudy and Tom at the broader compliance challenges for dealerships in general for the next 3 to 5 years?
So I think what you're saying, Val, is like for the dealers that are trying to compete with the Carvanas and the CarMaxes and the Amazons, like where they're going to be selling vehicles offsite, and you're obviously in a similar type environment as how they're dealing. What does that look like?
Right. Anything digital retailing, EVs, and anything like that really focuses on that.
Yeah, I mean, my answer for you is no matter what your process is, whatever your technology stack is, you should have a trust but verify mentality, which is if you're not spot checking what's going on and putting eyeballs or the words "the human in the loop." If you don't have you've got to have a human in the loop to make sure that people are using the technology properly. Let's start there, because there's all kinds of technology out there that people have and they write checks for every month, but they don't use. I mean, there's all kinds of great compliance technology out there and software solutions. And a lot of dealers think, oh, well, I pay such and such for my software, so I'm good. But who's doing the work, right? Who's making sure that the stuff is being followed in those software? Who's going behind it to check? You can have a lovely policy and procedure book, but if nobody's actively working on it, it's as good as not having a policy at all. So my succinct answer is trust but verify. Make sure people are following your process, following the technology, auditing periodically, whatever you think is appropriate, but make sure that things are being done the way that you want them to.
Great. Trust but verify. Well, I think I'm going to open it up for some comments. If my friends want to have any questions up on screen from the comments in the chat, anybody viewing, if there's questions that they have for Tom or Val or myself, we'd love to be able to answer those now. I did see, I saw we actually had a mobile notary pop on and ask some questions and about a dealer that needs us and hadn't heard of us before. So that was interesting. Appreciate that. Paid for this podcast, but
keep the card orders coming.
Yeah. Anything else? We'll pop it up on screen in a sec if we have any. I'll just give you all a sec. Tom, I have a Jeff Bezos quote, and I don't always agree with Jeff Bezos, but he said, when the numbers when the anecdotes disagree with the numbers, you should probably stop looking at the numbers and focus on the anecdotes, and they'll probably tell you a story, right, of where the numbers are lying to you. So I think that's pertinent to what you just said.
I mean, I'm going to speak at a conference in Wisconsin on Monday, and one of the topic I'm talking about is how to respond to internet complaints. And a lot of it's unfortunately comical. I mean, one of my first slide is a person who pours their heart out and says, "Here's all the things that happened to me, and I really need some help." And the dealership's response was, "Please send your concerns to this email address, and we'll be glad to help you."
Right.
I mean, just brain dead. That's brain dead.
Could have been AI.
It could have been AI, and that's why I said you have to have human in the loop, right? You have to have somebody periodically going through. But what should really happen on those complaints is somebody should pick up the phone. Everybody knows who that customer is, even if they use Surfer Girl 123, right? Everybody knows the story in the store. They know who had a problem and what the problem was. Why isn't somebody picking up the phone and calling and saying, "Hey, we understand you have a problem. Come on in and let's fix it." Going back to what we talked about before, which is customer problems are the number one reason that regulatory, issues happen.
Gotcha. Well, I think no other questions coming in. We're a little over time, so I think I'm going to close up our fourth Fraudcast. I would tell everybody, mark your calendars. We are having another one of these on September 26th. I will actually be myself at the Autovate conference in Scottsdale, Arizona, with some of the fellow leaders in the auto business and the innovation side. So I'll be joining you from there with some special guests to be named. And I would just like to recap this discussion. So, we started off with the recent news about Tricolor and really how the fraud came from the inside, not the outside. We did talk about, how Tom's journey into providing a resource for dealers that may not normally have access to one. And obviously it's a great idea. We hear about fractional things all the time, but a fractional compliance officer sounds like an amazing idea. Tuck the Octopus. Sounds like I got to put that on the reading list. And then I would also just add, we have to get back to remembering that people are the core of this business. You can have all the technology in the world. If technology is left to its own devices, we're going to get Skynet. If people might be too young to get the Terminator joke, but
I'm not.
Okay. So I think that's going to be critical to preventing loss. And at the end of the day, we all want the auto business to be successful. And, this over-reliance on just technologies is probably going to undo us if we're not careful. So I think it's great to have like minds on the call. We'll be sending this out. So if you've attended and want to send to somebody, you'll be able to forward that link and watch the full broadcast. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody in a few weeks. Thank you, Val. Thank you, Tom. And as I always like to sign off, I would tell you all to continue to be a maverick. See ya.